Hello friends, I'm Joe, this is Same Name Different Game, and it is that time of year once again where I do a multi-episode series to celebrate the launch of a console. Or sometimes the birth of a company, but usually the launch of a console, and this year it's the 30th birthday of the release of the neo-geo AES in North America, and I love the neo-geo. So let's dive in, not with a little history, no, but with a lot of it. About the company behind everyone's favorite expensive home console, SNK. In 1978, a man named Eikichi Kawasaki founded Shin Nihon Kikaku, or the New Japan Project, in Osaka, Japan. Kawasaki was born in 1944, but details about his life prior to SNK are very sparse, I'm afraid, as opposed to someone like Kenzo Tsujimoto, founder of crosstown rival Capcom. But whatever he spent his first 34 years doing, he would spend the rest in the video game industry, much like Tsujimoto. Many sources will tell you that SNK's first game was Ozma War, but that is not the case. Sadly, most of SNK's earliest games are currently considered lost. We know that they made several breakout clones under the title Micon Kit, Micon being a Japanese portmanteau of microcomputer, indicating that these games were in fact running on microprocessors, not dedicated logic boards. In the 80s, SNK managed some international hits, but for the first half of the decade, they themselves did not have an office outside of Japan, relying on companies like Rockola or TradeWest to distribute their games internationally. But in 1986, two big things happened to shake up SNK. They signed on to make games for the NES after becoming a licensed third party for the Famicom in 1985, and they opened a US office. In fact, as if the Osaka connection wasn't enough, one of the men chosen early on for SNK's North American operation was Paul Jacobs, a longtime veteran of the coin-op industry who had only recently been a founding employee of Capcom's US office. Jacobs joined the company as executive vice president and general manager in late 1986, and by spring of '87, he was the president of SNK's American operation. For the rest of the 80s, SNK made plenty of arcade games, many of which were successful, and a good number were ported to the Famicom in Japan and NES elsewhere. And while, also like Capcom, SNK relied on the, talents of shadow developer Micronix for their first few games, they eventually moved NES development in-house with Iron Tank. But as the 90s began to dawn, SNK had a new plan to take the coin-op space by storm. On January 31st, 1990, in Japan, Eikichi Kawasaki unveiled the neo-geo hardware for the first time. And soon after, SNK would have its American coming out party. At the American Coin Machine Exposition, or ACME, held in Chicago that year, Paul Jacobs would unveil the Neo-Geo MVS, or Multi-Video System, SNK's new arcade hardware. In a feature for the pre-ACME issue of Replay magazine, Jacobs laid out the plan. SAR, or Search and Rescue, would be SNK's final dedicated game cabinet for the foreseeable future. They were going all in on neo-geo, a new standard featuring cabinets that could play host to up to 6 games, available on cartridges for what Replay described as 1/4 to 1/3 the present cost of a universal conversion kit for an arcade cabinet. The savings in floor space and cost would have operators coming to them in droves. Jacobs informed Replay that operators in the US and Canada could expect their orders to be fulfilled by the end of April 1990. 2 models were available at the time: the 4-slot with a 19-inch monitor, and the 6-slot with a 25-inch monitor, though immediately the latter option couldn't be filled, as the neo-geo initially shipped with only 5 available MVS games: Riding Hero, Top Players Golf, Baseball Stars, NAM 1975, and Magician Lord. And that is our game for this episode. It made sense to go with a launch title, as well as the fact that Magician Lord has some interesting quirks when comparing the MVS and AES versions, but we'll get to those later. For now, let's talk about the MVS version of Magician Lord. And yes, this is really how big neo-geo cartridges are. This one is actually my Darksoft kit, which is how I played these games, but a real copy of Magician Lord would look basically identical to this. And it would compact in a big cardboard box like this with an end label as well, and inside here would be a bit of bezel art that you could put on the machine that would tell you how to play, which I don't have any examples of. It would also have come with a little plastic card like this that you put in the system's light up marquee, this one of course being for 3-count bout, but you get the idea. Magician Lord was developed by Alpha Denshi, who would later be known as ADK, a longtime arcade developer who actually began life as a hardware manufacturer making audio equipment. In fact, they had a hand in designing the neo-geo hardware alongside SNK. According to a 1994 interview with Gamist magazine, translated, of course, by shmuplations.com, Akira Ushizawa of ADK said that
we ended up forging a close relationship with SNK,
to the point that many describe them as a second-party developer to SNK. Magician Lord tells the story of Elta, the last descendant of the Magician Lord, a hero who years ago sealed away the evil Gala Geese, a man attempting to resurrect the evil god as a Torse. Geese was sealed by 8 books of power, but over time the seal has weakened, and Gala Geese is once again free and attempting to revive as a Torse. Elta must now secure the 8 books and seal Gala Geese once again. But of course, none of this is told to you in the actual game, at least not when you're playing on the MVS. But you do get some fantastic voice lines from Gala Geese in classic 90s broken video game English as you start each stage. This one is my favorite.
You persistent guy, but your life ends right now.
It's not exactly B-garbage of cesspool, but it's up there. At any rate, you're pretty well plunked right into the action, taking on 8 stages to save the land. Elta is equipped with magic that can be powered up twice, as well as orbs he can use to transform into 6 different alternate forms, from a ninja, to a samurai, to a dragon man. Of course, those forms and power-ups would be much more useful if it was easier to hold on to them. Taking a single hit drops your power level, and when you transform, your life bar is doubled, from 2 hits to 4, but taking 2 hits will turn you back into Elta. And believe me when I tell you that this game doesn't take long to hit you twice. This game is hard. Ridiculously hard, honestly. It's a quarter muncher of the highest order. In that 1994 interview, Ushizawa said,
I know how hard it was. In the initial location test, it was actually quite easy, but we thought that would be boring, so we upped the difficulty, resulting, unfortunately, in what you know today.
I'd be interested to play the original location test version because this game throws so much at you, mainly in the form of enemies who are just much more mobile and way faster than Elta. The only saving grace is that you start exactly where you died, but I shudder to think how much money I would have spent beating this game if I didn't have the option to just use free play. It honestly just feels cheap. Still, it has 8 levels packed with interesting locales, cool enemy designs, and levels that can be quite lengthy. Despite its difficulty, I do like how the stages are long, including optional doors with areas usually containing power-ups behind them, but also not so long or expansive that you can get lost. Also, if you know the critical path, some of the stages become quite short. Beyond that, there's not much to say, at least about the MVS version, because it's a pretty straightforward action game. But that is not where the story of the neo-geo or Magician Lord ends. In fact, Magician Lord was a launch title as well as one of the pack-in options for the neo-geo home system, the AES, which is what I'm celebrating by doing this whole series of episodes. The neo-geo is unique in that it is both a home system and an arcade standard. And of course, the version you dealt with would inform your opinion of it. As I mentioned earlier, for arcade operators, the MVS carts were extremely cheap by that standard. But the home version, by far the most expensive system of its time, and even when the cost of the console itself was eclipsed by the 3DO, games remained far and away the priciest on the market. And because of this, coin-op trade mags were psyched about the neo-geo, while the enthusiast press, covering primarily home gaming, was a little less enthusiastic. And I get why. First of all, though the system hit Japan fairly soon after the MVS, it could only be rented initially, not purchased. And once it was available at retail, how many of EGM or GamePro's readers could afford one? With the system priced at $649.99, which, yeah, did include 2 high-quality joysticks and either NAM 1975 or Magician Lord, but still additional carts being in the $200 and up range, you could get a Super NES with 2 controllers and Super Mario World for the cost of just one AES game, or a Genesis with Sonic and another full-priced game of your choice. The consumer market's lack of reaction is probably why the US press took a minute to review neo-geo games at all. The earliest reviews I'm aware of were in the March 1991 issue of EGM, including a pretty glowing review of Magician Lord, in which one editor, Martin Alessi, says Magician Lord is
definitely the best Neo Geo game there is or ever will be.
Bold claim, my dude. Even if he assumed that the Neo Geo would have the standard-ish system life of 5 or so years instead of the much longer one it did have, the home system wasn't even at retail until July 1st, 1991, and the arcade system was barely a year in the wild. Why would you think Magician Lord was the Bret Hart of the Neo Geo? Also, Martin, Guy, you only gave it a 9. The rest of the enthusiast press took even longer. GamePro didn't review any Neo Geo games until their January 1992 issue, and Die Hard Game Fan didn't get any in their pages until February of 1993, which, given that magazine's reputation and general demeanor as the too cool for school game magazine, feels quite odd. You'd think they would have been reviewing Neo Geo games from day one. Also, for what it's worth, they did review Magician Lord 2 years after its initial launch, but still gave it very high praise, which I suppose is in line with their reputation and general demeanor as the too cool for school game magazine, which means we should talk about Magician Lord on the AES. Upon launch, the Neo Geo AES was immediately branded the system for rich kids. Who could afford that? But what got the press and the players was the quality of these games when compared to their arcade counterparts. These are not ports. Magician Lord on the AES is, in terms of stages, visuals, and music, identical to the MVS version. The pinouts were changed for AES games so thrifty arcade operators couldn't buy the cheaper home games to put in their cabinets, but the games contained therein are functionally identical. In fact, Magician Lord is unique in that it is the only game in the library that doesn't have both versions on every cart. That's right. On most Neo Geo games, both the arcade and home versions, as well as all regional variants, are on the same cartridge, and the system's BIOS is what determines which version of the game you see. Typically, this just means things like selectable difficulty and a limited number of continues on the home version. Some games, like Samurai Shodown, had more violent content removed for certain regions and formats, as the American AES version of that game changes the blood to sweat, just like the Super NES Mortal Kombat, as well as removing the special animations for fatal strikes. But if you use that same cartridge and the popular fan-made Universe BIOS, or UniBIOS, to change the game to MVS mode, or the Japanese AES version, those changes will not appear. And while this is apparently the case with later produced copies of Magician Lord, the initial runs on both MVS and AES have only their respective versions, which normally wouldn't make much difference, as I said, but Magician Lord has some more substantial differences than most Neo Geo games do between home and arcade. The first one you'll notice is that on the Advanced Entertainment System, there's a lengthy story intro that simply is not there when playing in the arcade. So in this version, you learn all about Galagese and his past. Beyond that, you'll see the more substantial changes. Elton now starts with 3 hits instead of 2, and a transformation will take him up to 6 total. This seems like a minor change, but it honestly makes a big difference. Not a big enough difference, however, to offset the other changes that make the game even harder. You no longer respawn where you died. A death will send Alta back to a checkpoint, usually a door, and a continue will send him back to the beginning of the stage. Fortunately, unlike most AES versions of games, you do not have limited credits and can continue as much as you like, but still, this makes the game way harder, which it frankly did not need. On that note, going back to that interview with Ushizawa, in response to the interviewer's comment about ADK trying to get people to buy the neo-geo memory card, he said,
Well, you're not wrong. We had originally designed Magician Lord thinking it would one day make it to home consoles, you see. We didn't think it would be played so widely in arcades either.
Speaking of the memory card, we should talk about that. One of the first things I remember hearing about the Neo Geo was this segment on Video Power.
Here I am, peoples, just hanging out at the factory where they make these neo-geo multi-video systems. Now, what these things are is that you can play 4 different games on this machine. But that's not all. I got another surprise for you. This is the Neo Geo memory card. This is the Neo Geo arcade system. Now, how this thing works is that you slip your memory card into the memory card slot. Da-da-da-da-da, you start playing your game. Oh, wow, you're doing great, but look, it's 6 o'clock and you're gonna be late for dinner. What are you gonna do? Here's what you're gonna do. Okay, you pull your memory card out of the memory card slot, and now the next time I play a Neo Geo game, I continue from where I left off. Great, huh? Let's play some Ninja Combat.
I thought that was so cool, and it was a big selling point for the system. The first console or arcade system to use a memory card, allowing you to save your progress in some games and return to them later, transferring between MVS and AES. Getting back to Ushizawa's comments on the game coming home, while the AES version feels better structured as a console game like Ninja Gaiden or Ghouls and Ghosts, in terms of not popping right back up where you died, I feel like the broad difficulty on this one could have been retuned for the home version. Another weird thing about this particular game, as compared to most Neo Geo games, is that you can't change the difficulty. It's pinned on 4, which is the default for arcade versions of games, usually simply called MVS in home titles. If you have a Unibios, you can force it to change, but by default, it's stuck at 1 difficulty. Really hard. So that's the AES version. There was also a Neo Geo CD version that came out a few years later, but all that one does is change the music ever so slightly, so I think we'll leave it there for now. This would normally be the time where we would take a look and a listen side by side, but there's not really a reason to do that here because, again, the entire draw, the appeal, the selling point of the AES and the MVS is that they are the same. But let's go ahead and check out some footage without me yapping over it.
You persistent guy, but your life ends right now.
Honestly, this game is one that I would readily compare to Altered Beast on the Genesis. It's a side-scrolling action game, it features transformations, it was packed in with new hardware, and it impressed in its day based on the visuals and music when compared to the NES. But in this case, even when compared to the Super NES and Genesis. Unlike Altered Beast, I don't find it to have aged particularly well. Though, to be clear, I think Magician Lord is better than Altered Beast. And that makes it time to give the edge. And they're very, very similar. Like I said, if you want to see all the game has to offer, just credit feed your way through the MVS version. But if you want a stiffer challenge, I would check out the AES version. But be warned, that one's going to be a little bit harder for you to get access to, because the one that is readily available now on modern systems is part of the Hamster ACA NeoGeo Archives series, and like all games in that series, uses the MVS ROM. And I don't really know why that is. Like, you would think they would give you both options, because Hamster's pretty good at including all the different versions of games. I mean, I just talked about that Salamander one a couple months ago. And yeah, like I said, most AES and MVS games really aren't that different, but neither are the American and Japanese versions of Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, and you get both versions in the Arcade Archives version of that, so I don't know. That does it for this episode, but come back next time, because I will be talking about a game in a genre that the Neo Geo is famous for. You won't want to miss it. Hey folks, it's Joe, and big shoutouts to both Neo Alec from Basement Brothers and Cyril from Defunct Games. Both lent their voices and helped with research. Links to their channels are in the description. Check them out. Thanks so much for listening to me talk about the early days of the Neo Geo and Magician Lord. If you liked what you saw, consider sharing this video with your friends, and do all this stuff. Like, subscribe, hit the stupid bell, comment below telling me your favorite Neo Geo game. If you really liked it, consider supporting directly via Patreon or YouTube memberships. You'll get early access to new videos, the chance to vote on polls for upcoming video topics, your name here with these cool people, and more. You can also buy merch at the link below and shop at small businesses using affiliate links in the description. If you want more Neo Geo, the video on the left is on King of the Monsters 2, and the video on the right is on Super Baseball 2020.